welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harfey.
And my name is Stephen A. Mackay.
We are both best-selling historical fiction authors, and together we chat about all things historical and anything that could fall under the banner of action and adventure in books, film, TV, and games.
Oh, and we also talk about rock music and black metal from time to time.
And monastic doom metal.
Northumbrian.
Northumbrian monastic doom metal.
From time to time.
Stephen and I are both massive fans of music, and we often mention the music we listen to and enjoy, both for pleasure and to set the mood while writing. So far on the podcast, we've had quite a few authors on as guests, but today we're delighted to have our very first musician guest. Mark Deeks is the keyboard player and backing vocalist of the black metal band Winterfylleth, which I hope I pronounced right. Mark joined the band in 2014, and since then they've recorded 3-4 maybe studio albums and 2 live albums. He also teaches piano as That Piano Guy and has worked as musical director on many different shows and with diverse choirs. Sometime during lockdown, Mark started working on a new side project, and this culminated in a new band called Ard and an album titled Take Up My Bones. Welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Mark.
It's always very uncomfortable when people sit and read introductions about you like that, because it's things you know, but when it starts getting listed, it sounds really pretentious. I don't know why. It's just pure lack of self-confidence, perhaps. Perhaps it's just my own issues. But yeah, no, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And I think it's part of this sort of imposter syndrome that most normal people suffer from, and I know I suffer from it as well. If I go on a podcast or a talk, and people say, "Oh, and he's written all these books," and it gets awkward. Yeah. it's like awkwardness in accepting sort of praise or lists of achievements.
I don't feel like that at all. I'll take any praise I can get.
But the reality is, though, Stephen, you actually never leave your nest, do you? Just stay there in your little cave.
Just stay in this studio listening to black metal all day.
That's right. So first things first then, Mark. So I've given the introduction, listed lots of your achievements. Hopefully I've got some of them right. But I wanted to ask you how you got where you are today. You're a piano teacher, musical director, member of Winterfylleth, and now frontman and lead singer and guitarist of this new band Ard that you've written and produced the first album for. So could you give us like a potted history of your trajectory from wherever you started to now and this place where you are now in your musical career?
Just casually sum up 40 years. Yeah, I mean, I guess the starting point was like a lot of kids, started playing piano when I was a kid, and I was 5 years old, and there was a piano in the house which my mum and dad had both struggled to attempt to play. I didn't really desperately come from a desperately musical family, but I seemed to be apparently quite transfixed by the fact I could hit this thing and sounds came out of it. But I went to piano lessons, and I seemed to take pretty quickly to it and do quite well quite quickly. So I was like the piano geek. But when I discovered, like a lot of teenagers, rock and metal music when I was about 14 and 15, sort of quickly clocked that piano's just not very cool in metal to a lot of people. So
that sounds very much like Tim Minchin.
Yeah, exactly. So Tim Minchin, there's a Tim Minchin song that I identify with a lot. I won't say which one it is, but there was sort of like a fork in the road at that point, and so I quite quickly clocked. I was teaching piano at the age of 15, and I'm now 45. So that fork in the road around that time was, here is the kind of music or here are the kinds of music that I'm going to be able to perform myself because I know how to play piano, perform professionally, teach professionally, work in here's the area of the musical universe that I can make a living at. And then over here is all the music I listen to when I don't have to listen to the music that I'm making a living with. And so, like Stephen, I listen to, all forms of extreme metal all day, every day. But until this point, until joining Winterfylleth, there hadn't really been a sort of collision of my two areas of my world. But when I joined Winterfylleth, that was initially through doing some research for my PhD, because they were a band that I was writing about for my PhD. and sort of got to know each other and got on really well. And before we knew where we were, we got on so well that they asked me to join the band. And there was there's always, for the last sort of 8 to 9 years of my time with the band, there are still lots of Winterfylleth fans who don't know I exist, which is quite funny. My photos are on the album, but I'm like the sort of fifth member that
You're in the videos as well.
Yeah, half the fans don't know I exist, because when they perform live, when the band performs live, I'm usually not there.
Yeah.
So any live footage they see, there's 4 people on stage, but there's 5 of us in the studio. And that was always the case until we made an acoustic record a few years ago called The Hallowing of Ardom, which I was heavily involved in terms of the writing and
I thought it might have been
your voice as well, I think.
Yeah, so basically when we make metal records, I do a little bit of singing here and there, so little pockets of songs I'm involved in, little bits of keyboards, a little bit of singing, and being involved behind the scenes in the writing. But the sort of decision was sort of reached that if I was to perform live with the band, what would I do for the 80% of the other 80% of a song? So we never had me live until we did the dates for the acoustic album, until literally just the last few months.
Mm-hmm.
Done the first couple of times with the band as a 5-piece in a metal setting, and we basically decided we're going to do that for every gig going forward if I'm available, kind of thing. So and then
just a quick aside there. So they didn't, or you decided as a band not to have you on stage playing because you weren't playing that much in those metal songs. So what are you doing now in terms of the arrangements? Are the arrangements different or the same, or
so involved? We took we were doing the Prophecy Fest in Germany a couple of months ago, because my Art project got signed to Prophecy Productions, I should say. So Prophecy Fest is the label's own festival, and Arth were asked to go and play that, which was technically going to be the first ever Arth gig. And we put a warm-up gig on in Manchester first. And basically, Winterfylleth were a band that Prophecy, then Winterfylleth's not signed to Prophecy, having a sort of affinity for, and have some friends on bands there. And so decided, Prophecy asked to Winterfylleth, could Winterfylleth come and play too? So we did both bands on the same day. And we basically decided we would take some of the tracks from the Winterfylleth catalogue that aren't necessarily performed live very often, and also add some additional keyboards throughout, basically. So I just stuck loads of keyboards over all of the Winterfylleth songs and hope no one would mind. But as long as the band were happy, that was fine. But so we kind of added some extra stuff.
Okay, so you altered the arrangements a little bit of some of the songs and picked out some of the songs. Okay, cool.
So sorry, carry on. I'm just conscious that you've only got until 1:15, but your debut album, Arth's debut album, Take Up My Bones, is very much a historical piece, telling the story of St. Cuthbert's body. The cover art is evocative. The sound is very rich and textured with nods to the past. But excitingly, you even have a Lindisfarne mead tied to the album, which I'm drinking right now. So tell us about how this all came about, Arth and the album and the mead.
So I've got an interest in how musicians represent where they're from. That was sort of my starting point. So that was what my PhD was about, in terms of national identity in metal, and how musicians use elements of their imagery and perhaps poetry or old mythology or whatever it might be, from their region or country, and sometimes even include elements of folk music from their country's history as well, and incorporate these elements in different ways. And in the last 40 years or so, that's been a huge development in the world of metal, particularly in sort of Northern and Eastern European bands. So that's what I'd written about for my PhD. And, if I basically decided, I particularly my wife and Dan Kapp, the old ex-Winterfylleth guitarist, who I'm one of my best friends, had sort of been harassing me that I really should make a metal album for myself, kind of thing. And I love being part of Winterfylleth. That they're my best friends, and we really enjoy making music together. But of course, I sort of joined Winterfylleth halfway through the career, and halfway through the discography, and so I really wanted to do something for myself. But as I said before, I'd never quite been able to figure out a way for the two areas of my musical life to collide. I'm a piano player who coaches choirs for a living and arranges for orchestras and stuff, and I love extreme metal. So how could I really make these two things collide when in extreme metal land there are albums that proudly say there are no keyboards on this record? So it took it literally took me to my early 40s to figure out how I was going to do it, and I just suddenly decided that I say suddenly, it took a bit of time, but I basically decided that for once in my life I was going to be musically selfish, because I spent my entire professional career making music to other people's specifications. And I perform the music that they want to hear at an event or arrange for a project or whatever. So I was, I'm getting in my 40s. I've now got a young baby daughter. I want to have something that's just for me. And if this is the most expensive set of MP3s I ever own, that's fine. So I just forked out the money for the studio, hired musicians, had the artwork painted, and just paid for it all myself without any label. Completed the album exactly to my vision with no care almost for what people told me it should or shouldn't include. Loads of piano, loads of cellos, loads of vocal harmonies, sod it kind of thing. And this is what I would like to hear. And within a fortnight of its completion, had a 5-album deal with Prophecy Productions, which is one of my favorite
5 albums.
Labels. Yeah.
Nice. So there's more to come then.
Well, it's one of these deals where it's basically all based on the sales of the previous one. So if you sell enough records, you get another one. But yeah, it's technically a 5-album deal. So yeah, that has to be. Well, we sold enough on the first one, so there's going to be another one.
Yeah.
So.
There's going to be a second one at least. Well, that's
I mean, it's already started. Yeah.
Good stuff. Because we both like it.
Thank you.
I listen to it a fair bit when I'm writing my books.
It's really interesting. I mean, you describe it. I just for the people listening that don't know, I met Mark in Bamburgh Castle a few months ago. We both at a talk about the Bamburgh Bones project, which was all about the bones of people that were found in a burial just south of Bamburgh Castle, and it was all dating back to the 7th and 8th centuries, and that's when I first heard you playing. I think it was the first live performance you'd done of anything, just on piano and you singing. And I bought the CD, and when I'm driving home, I listened to that CD in the car driving home, and it was interesting because you described it as doom metal.
Yeah,
but it doesn't really, to me, it doesn't sound like doom metal.
No, I agree with you, Matthew. My idea is Black Sabbath or some trouble.
Well, there are a myriad of styles of doom metal. So without getting too sort of pernickety about it, I mean, there's death doom metal, there's melodic death doom metal, there's epic doom, there's trad doom like the Sabbath and Trouble, etc.
Well, I think for audience, so maybe I don't know whether it's best if you describe it just for people listening, because it's not. I think if somebody said to me, "Listen to this doom metal album," I'd be thinking, "Oh, maybe that's not for me."
Well, that's what I thought.
I like sort of what it's saying is trad doom metal. I quite like, but I don't know. It didn't sort of resonate with me. And then when I listened to it, it's very different to what I expected. So maybe you could just describe. You described a little bit of the cellos and stuff, but maybe you could describe a bit.
Yeah, I mean, so it was all written on piano, because I'm a piano player and that's what I know best. And then I would translate it onto guitars and cellos and so on. So I think it takes elements of some particular doom bands. So I think it takes elements of, there's a Norwegian band called Funeral that they made an album called From These Wounds a number of years ago, which it takes some influence from a little bit in the vocals. I think it takes elements of a band called Shape of Despair, but without any extreme vocals, because I can't do extreme vocals. There are no screaming extreme vocals on it. I think it takes a nod to the early 90s Peaceville scene of bands like Paradise Lost and My Dying Bride and Anathema. So I don't know how many of these bands that your listeners or you guys are necessarily familiar with, but the starting point was a Finnish band called Tenhi, Tenhi, that are a folk band. They're an almost entirely acoustic band with lots of piano over the top. They call it sort of dark folk. And I'm a huge fan of Tenhi, but that's not doom metal at all. And then I was on holiday listening to some Mourning Beloveth, the Irish doom band, and suddenly had this sort of epiphany, penny drop moment. I thought, well, what would happen if I took this sort of acoustic folk laden in piano music and combined it with some doom, kind of one with that sound, and then put shed loads of my vocals harmonies on top.
To me, it sounds, you've obviously just given lots of reference points there and lots of sort of kind of description of different elements, and I think that helps people. That will help people understand kind of that it's not like, I don't know, hearing that you're in a black metal band or whatever, maybe that tinged or coloured my perception. I thought, he's going to be screaming like a maniac on here. I'm not going to be able to understand anything. It's almost like Gregorian chants. It sounds very historical, medieval, and epic and sweeping. I think the doom part of it for me feels like it's very much the sort of the ponderous. It's kind of slow pace.
It's all very slow.
It's all very slow pace. So it's much more like chanting, lots of harmonies, these big walls of sound, and it's very melodic. I mean,
absolutely
not difficult to listen to at all. And I think if you're in the right frame of mind, it could be really get you somewhere. You could
inspiring,
get lost in it and be inspired by it. So great.
I mean, it was always going to have lots of harmonies on it because I'm obsessed by harmonies. I coach choirs for a living, and one of my favorite bands that I first got into was Alice in Chains, who such a big part of their sound was their harmonies. So I've got a low voice.
Well, that's the thing. They're not Def Leppard style harmonies.
No, absolutely.
Don't want to give anybody the wrong idea. They're low harmonies, aren't they?
Yeah, I've got a low voice, and there's lots of them.
Yeah,
and that sort of started to seem to quite fit the themes I was writing about in terms of the.
It definitely fits with the idea of early medieval monks walking around. Have these walls of this sound of chants. Yeah.
So it just started to seem to all make sense to put it all together. And when the PR guy from Prophecy said he wanted to call it monastic Northumbrian doom, I was like. Fantastic, that'll do.
Yeah, that,
there you go. Monastic doom. I think that kind of works. Yeah.
Well, that's what we sort of call it in a lot of the promo stuff. But without wishing to get pigeonholed in, because I then get loads of messages on social media going, "So are you a Catholic?"
Right.
Interesting. So just quickly tell us about the mead, because I know that Stephen's very interested about the mead here, Lindisfarne mead.
So Stephen will like this sort of black metal nod. So that was a nod to how the 90s Norwegian black metal scene was sort of laced in controversy and drama and scandal and murder and crime. And there was in a country such as Norway, which has got quite a religious history in some ways, there was the government could easily have tried to bury that story internationally, because it was very scandalous and it was making international sort of music tabloid press kind of thing. But in the following years, what they did quite cleverly was the term Norwegian black metal started to become not just a musical term, but almost like a tourism term. And they sort of positioned this sort of alternative tourism where people could go and visit where these bands were from. They could visit the record shops that they used to gather in. They could visit the sites of the churches that were burned down as these teenagers sort of ran rampage kind of thing. So and it became a huge tourism boost for Norway. I myself have been to Bergen to go and see some of these places. So when we were talking about ways we could sort of promote an album which is so intrinsically linked to Northumbria, the discussion with Gunnar, the PR guy at Prophecy, was like, well, why don't we see if there are any sort of tourism-related organisations in Northumberland who can sort of are big enough to think about outside the box a bit, and sort of can't see if there's any sort of possibility for mutual promotion. So I approached a number of organisations, and basically the premise was simple: if you will help us share word of this album, we will stick your logos and websites on our promotional materials and press releases. We don't require any money from you. Just, would you like to get involved? Because we're going to attempt to, in the same way as the Norwegians did, bring people to Northumberland to see the places that we're seeing Cuthbert were from, and follow the path of the story, etc. So that was the idea, which I thought from Gunnar was a great idea. So I spent a long time sort of emailing and phoning a lot of these places, and got a range of responses, as you might imagine.
Albeit.
The range of responses were Lindisfarne Mead saying, well, I basically said, would you consider an Ard Lindisfarne Mead? And I think I probably actually said, obviously you wouldn't consider an Ard Lindisfarne Mead, but would you share the social media posts? And the guys were amazing and said, oh yeah, we'll make some Ard and Winterfylleth. Brilliant.
Right.
Let's see if we can make it happen. So they very quickly sort of quite saw the connection and the possibilities and how it would just be a nice way to promote what they do. And at the other end of the scale, there was an organisation who shall remain nameless, who really should have known better, that said in an email, we can't see that the connection between what you're doing and what we do is strong enough. And, I won't name the organisation, but they were the organisation who are responsible for tourism in Northumberland.
Oh, right, okay.
I'll keep that email because it always gives me a chuckle. But yeah, so some people saw it and some people didn't, and that's fine. The Laying Art Gallery were great as well. They shared the story of the Art album as well, because they were getting the Lindisfarne Gospels this autumn. It's just finishing, so. Yeah, that's how it came about. It was a bit of mutual promotion was the idea, and some people sort of saw the connection and went for it. It was great.
That's brilliant, and I've seen it on. I think I've seen bottles of it in Lindisfarne. I was there just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, they've got a display in the shop. And in the Taste of Northumbria shop in Alnwick as well.
Yeah,
there's a permanent display there, and we've sold more than a couple of hundred bottles.
Brilliant.
Which, I mean, is extraordinary to me, because when I told the guys in Winterfylleth there was going to be Ard Lindisfarne mead, I mean, obviously I took some stick. Let's just the group WhatsApp chat was fairly lit up just for a few words there, as I was told in no uncertain terms, I'm not Iron Maiden, what are you doing? But I thought we'd sell 3,
Well, you're giving me ideas now, because I mean, lots of my books are set in Northumbria in the same sort of period. In fact, a couple appears in one of my books.
Lindisfarne
was. So I'm thinking, books. Yeah, I'm gonna have to be on to Lindisfarne mead, guys, and get some.
I'll buy it.
Bernicia Chronicles mead, but I'm going to move on to the next question. And you've already mentioned that you wrote your PhD thesis. Now I think you mentioned the title, but both Stephen and I have downloaded your thesis,
yeah, I've read
which is called.
I think you're people 2 and 3,
which is national identity in Northern and Eastern European heavy metal. Mm-hmm. Stephen said he's read most of it. I will admit that I haven't read most of it. I've skimmed lots of it, but I haven't read most of it. It's like 250 pages or something. I thought, I'll just download this and have a quick skim. I think, bloody hell, I'd forgotten how big a thesis was.
Yeah, it's 85,000 words.
Yeah, it's basically a novel. Yeah. So and obviously not it's interesting, but it's not a novel. But anyway, I've skimmed through it, and it's really interesting. You've got lots of stuff about history, of course, there, and you're talking about the national identity of people. But there's a lot of you also mentioned the sort of the dark history of black metal, and in passing just now, and there's a lot of negative press around black metal. There has definitely been in the past, and probably still is, and in particular surrounding the use of Nazi and satanic imagery and motifs, and the whole, and I guess the whole title, the whole thing of black metal, it's sort of negative. And so how does that perception of black metal in the mainstream media affect your decisions when songwriting and creating music, maybe on your own or with Winterfylleth? I mean, does that colour what you as a band or you as a songwriter put out? Or
yeah, it's, particularly with the Winterfylleth guys, from before I joined the band, from the very, very early days of Winterfylleth, there was an ex-member in the very, very early days who caused some controversy, and that has sadly followed the band round and still continues to do so to the day. So still, when Winterfylleth do gigs, there will sometimes be councils get protests and saying you should ban this band, etc. That still happens. It's happened this year. And from one line in one interview, however many years ago, 15 years ago, something. Mm-hmm. So from someone who hasn't been associated with a band 15 years, so that's how much it can follow you around. What upsets the guys, and I guess me in particular, having sort of not been in the band at that point, and being who I am, is I'm so vehemently anti-racist that if I were even to be remotely associated with it, it would really anger me. And I think there's I think the guys, everyone has their own views on history and how people represent where they're from. But I can tell you with my hand on my heart that there isn't a racist person in Winterfylleth. And I'm not involved in the writing of the lyrics as such, but when the lyrics are being written, that conversation just isn't happening. I've sat and watched it happen, and it isn't happening. And were it, I wouldn't be there. And saying all of that, as people, like yourselves, who have an interest in history and have an interest in how people respond to history and how people respond to notions of who they are and why, what makes us English and what makes us Stephen Scottish or whatever. How do we identify with who we are? Do we identify as English or British or Northumbrian or whatever it might be? I've always found it a really fascinating subject. So the word Arth means my native land. So if anyone, I get the mick taken out of me for the Winterfylleth lads. And they're like, if anyone should be getting called racist, you've literally named your band, not just native land, my native land. And of course, I use the word because I want it to, Arth will always be about Northumbria, which is my native land. And when we start talking about whether we are a native of somewhere, that language has become associated with subjects that are quite extreme when they're not intended to be so. They're not. I'm not talking about if you're not from Northumbria, get out. I'm just talking about this is the history of Northumbria, which it is factually, historically. I'm not saying it's right or wrong any more than I'm saying. Like I said to you, I get lots of messages asking if it's a Christian record. Well, no, it's not a Christian record. It's just about someone who was Christian. In the same way that we talk about, Slayer lyrics. Are they advocating for, torture or the Nazi Party, Angel of Death, etc.? Yeah. Well, it's been sung by a Jew. Tom Araya is a Jew, so we should be allowed to discuss subjects in a factual way, without it being assumed that we are somehow interpreting this in a political way.
Yeah,
and Arth is about Northumbria, so therefore it is about my native land.
I find it quite interesting because we write books about history and stuff, and we kind of not glorify it, but we love the history of our lands, and I'm part English, so I write books that are going around England and stuff, and it's the history of it all and Vikings and whatever, and authors seem to get away with it much more than bands do for some reason. I don't really know why. There's always a big problem with that.
I've often thought about that because, for example, my wife is really into music theatre, and I often point out to her that the stuff that is written in music theatre is way worse and way more extreme than some of the stuff that's in rock and metal music. And rock and metal music takes the hammer, and no one's wanting to ban the Book of Mormon's music theatre show, which is outrageously offensive in places. And it's always interesting how different art get treated in different ways.
It is, and there's also, one of the things that has bothered me since I've been published, and my books are set, as I said, in the 7th century, and so it's all very contemporary with Sutton Hoo and that sort of period, and so you get the odd. I get the odd. Not so much now, but with the first couple of books, I got people sometimes contacting me and kind of on the periphery of this nationalistic, especially from America, sort of the Anglo. I don't know, it's because the word Anglo-Saxon gets used, and they take that as meaning something that perhaps it's not intended to be to mean. And I know now I think in academia in America they've stopped using the term Anglo-Saxon. Really? They call it something else because there's such a link to this sort of white supremacist, racist sort of stuff, and the fact that these different groups like the Nazis and neo-Nazis, whatever, have appropriated symbols that are historical. Precisely. So like the symbol of the swastika, which is used to symbolize Thunor, the god of thunder of the Anglo-Saxons. I've actually got a replica scabbard for a sax knife thing up on the shelf there, and it was made authentically to represent a 7th century, 8th century Anglo-Saxon scabbard, and it's got swastikas on it, and I can't show anybody.
Yeah.
Because it looks like I'm a racist.
Yeah.
But it's just symbolism that's used all over the place in that time on burials or on their armor or different things.
Well, I think it's similar to how the sort of old argument about can you separate the art from the person, the artist. So there are examples of bands whose music I love, where I don't say I'm not allowed to be photographed in their t-shirts, but it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Don't put on my Instagram a photo of me in some of their t-shirts, because the artist has said some racist stuff, but the music itself and the lyrics clearly aren't.
Yeah,
but we just have to. It's a fine line. Anything to do with identity and us and them is very, very, very much a fine line. But Arth is not making commentary on Northumbria's history. I mean, there's a little bit of artistic license, like there always is with these things. And quite amusingly, so I rearranged the Arth album for choir. So my choir's been performing it in various locations across the northeast over the last few months, including the church on Holy Island, St Mary's and St Cuthbert's Church in Chesley Street, which is one of the locations that the Cuthbert's coffin stayed for a long time. And we're going to do Durham Cathedral as well in January, where obviously the coffin rests, except the mystery about it's not the real one, but that can wait for another day. And so when we were going to perform in the church in Holy Island, someone someone associated with the church took exception to some of the lyrics in the album, saying that because the lyrics in the first song, Burden Foretold, are about Cuthbert's vision and premonition of his death, and how you could suggest that the monks who ended up carrying his coffin around the northeast for over 100 years had, whilst they might perceive that to be a blessing, you could also perceive it to be a curse, because that was a pretty hard task to protect Cuthbert's body for all that time, whilst Vikings are rampaging around the land and battles are kicking off left, right, and centre. So the lyric is, "Here's your sorrow, here's your curse," and even that upset some people. About, was I suggesting that Cuthbert had cursed his followers? No, not as such, but they did get a pretty rough end of the deal. So. This kind of identity and how people perceive themselves, and whether you are going to appropriate it in a way that's in agreement with how they think it should be interpreted, is a very delicate area. But Arth is just recounting the tale, and that's all it ever will be. It's not political. It's certainly not racist. It's just the history of Northumbria.
Good stuff.
Fair enough.
Well, that explained it nicely. Okay, so I listen to black metal all the time, like Winterfylleth, Bathory, Enslaved, and so on, when I'm reading and writing my novels. Do you listen to music when you're reading or studying, or are you just happy to get a break from music for a little while?
So I don't read a lot, is the honest answer. I have to remake myself. I know I have to. Sorry, I realize it's the wrong thing to say on this podcast, but I don't. When I do read, I read fact, which I realize is now I've even alienated myself even further. I don't read.
Well, that's fine. We read that constantly as well for our research, so we understand.
So I kind of
we've both downloaded your PhD, so I'm guessing you've got to buy at least one of our books each. I mean, it's fair enough.
I haven't made any money from you downloading my PhD.
Okay, fair enough. But what about the CD?
Oh yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And the Lindisfarne Mead.
Yeah, it's fair. But the so I've never been a big reader. I have to make myself do it, and if I do it last thing at night, I'm going to nod off, kind of thing. I'm one of those nodders, so I have to make myself do it. So I have always written music far more easily than writing lyrics. So the lyrics are always last. The music's all written. And, the music I'm writing now for Arth has just literally got me making sounds on top with my voice, because I have no idea what the words are going to be. and I'll procrastinate on that till the last.
So do you actually use a melody? Like I remember James Hetfield used to just kind of sing yeah to a melody, and then
I see lots of bands do that.
Yeah, random sounds of vowels and anything, just to know where the sort of vocals are going to go, etc. Because I find it quite hard to really get a feel of like the structure of a song unless I know which sections of vocals are going to go in.
Yeah.
What the words are going to be. No, I have no idea at this point.
Interesting.
I mean, I know what it's going to be about.
Yeah.
I don't know what any of the lyrics
exactly
are.
The words.
Yeah. I think lots of bands do that, though, don't they? Just sort of singing gobbledygook or sounds, and
Well, Sigur Rós, the Icelandic band, who I'm a big fan of, they invented their own language. A lot of
course.
They did a lot of.
No, it's such a geeky thing to do.
Yeah, it is. A lot of Sigur Rós songs are not even in Icelandic; they're in what they call Hopelandic, which is their own modification of Icelandic, which I understand originally came out of him just making sounds whilst they're recording.
Well, I think Tolkien would have approved of that. With his making languages up. So you mentioned before that you recently played with Winterfylleth for the first time on stage, and you did your Arth gig.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your biggest gig that you've performed at? I'm guessing that could be with those bands or with your choir or some other thing.
Yeah, I mean, sort of professionally away from the world of metal. I used to be the assistant musical director with a choir of 300 singers in Newcastle.
Wow.
Called the Inspiration Choir. And so there were times where I had to conduct that with an orchestra as well. So 300 singers and an orchestra in a hall that held about 1,500 or so. So I'm used to play in that venue quite a lot, which is called the Sage Gateshead. Where else have we done? I mean, I've played in Carnegie Hall, which is a sentence which always trips off the tongue beautifully.
Nice.
Yeah.
Just for about 10 minutes. But yeah, you can't take that away from me, kind of thing. That's the old.
Till they dragged you off the stage.
Well, true story. When we did the sound check, so I was on tour with the Inspiration Choir in New York. When we did the sound check, we were going to do like a medley of stuff from The Lion King. It was like a lot of music theatre stuff. But we didn't want to sort of do that in the sound check because there were people in the hall. So we just had the musical director. I was playing piano. The musical director decided to do another song that we were doing on the tour, so that we didn't give away what we were going to do in the performance. And he chose one which is a cappella, so there was no piano in it at all. So the sound check, I will forever be able to say I sound checked in Carnegie Hall without playing a note, and was told it sounded great. I came off stage and like, well, that was a rubbish one to choose for the sound check. I didn't play anything. Oh yeah, right, okay, I should be fine.
No bum notes, so
should be fine. Yeah, the piano will be fine. The volumes, the levels will be great.
So, how much do you have to do with Winterfylleth's songwriting then?
So it's kind of developed a bit over the years. I was originally brought in almost as like a vocal consultant. It was literally like, we're going in the studio. Can you come in and help us with our clean vocals and our harmonies? Because this is something like we sometimes find a little bit tricky to get right. And we think you'd be able to do it quicker for us. So that was when we were recording The Divination of Antiquity. That was the first time I'd gone in the studio, and we didn't really know each other very well. But because, I've got perfect pitch, I arrange choirs for a living, I can do harmonies in my head. It was very much a case of, right, you sing that, and there is a harmony section done in 10 minutes. And they were like, oh wow, this is much better. That would have taken us 5 hours. So it was very quick. That was my role at first, really just sort of helping out, arrange the harmonies and tell them what to sing. And as the sort of records went on, helping a bit more with the writing here. So writing any string parts now really sort of ends up being my thing, writing any keyboard parts, because there tends to be some violin and cello on the record, so I'll write those. And doing any of the sort of clean vocals will tend to be, I mean, not solely my domain, but I'll be heavily involved in those. And then on the last, on The Dark Hereafter, I was heavily involved in the writing of a track called Green Cathedral. Me and Chris, did the bulk of that one. And then on The Reckoning Dawn, the last studio album, that was the first time I pretty much wrote a song, the name of which is completely escaped me. It's track 9. It's track 9. It's because I don't write the lyrics, you see. So I could never.
I was listening to it today, but I could not tell you.
It begins with a Y. Oh, hell's bells! I can't remember what my own songs are called. It's because Dan wrote the lyric. Yeah, Dan
goes up to 8 on here.
Oh, sorry, no.
Yielding the March Law.
Yielding the March Law. Began with a Y. There we go.
I was beginning to think you're not actually in the band. I was starting to question, think this is actually not true. He's made it all up.
Dan wrote the lyrics, but I did the bulk of the riff writing on that one. So, yeah.
Track 7.
Track 7. I knew it was towards the end. So, yeah, it's sort of developed over the years. And I think now it's a case of like Chris and Nick have always been sort of the predominant music writers. But, everyone runs everything past everyone kind of thing. And there's the group chat's always got sort of little demos flying in it, and now we've got Russ on guitar, and he's helping with the writing as well. So it's going to be the first time we've written with Russ.
How are things credited on the albums? Is everything credited for the band, or is it credited for who wrote the song, who wrote the music, who wrote the lyrics?
It's a long time since I've looked at the credits. I think so. Chris will write the majority of the lyrics. I think the lyric writers tend to get separately credited,
right.
But yeah, we tend to be pretty diplomatic when it comes to the music that we all.
Okay. So the old snarky adage is those who can't do teach. But you play in a black metal band. You have your own band, even with your branded mead, as we mentioned. But you also teach piano, and you've been a musical director for different choirs, etc. So how do all those different facets of your working musical life fit together, and I think we've talked about how it all fits together, really, but which brings you most joy out of all of those facets? Which is one of those musical elements that you love the most?
I can honestly tell you that Arth is the first time in my life that I'm totally satisfied with the project I've done.
Wow.
Because I'm an absolute raging perfectionist.
I'm just surprised you're saying you're 100% satisfied with anything. Because as a creator, I don't think I'm ever been 100%.
I did about 100, but as good as
it's going to get. Yeah.
I still love it. I haven't listened to it all the way through in a little while, but whenever I hear it, I think I can hear the intent behind it, and the intent behind it was just to enjoy myself with no one else's specifications.
I guess you remember the feeling you had when you were making it, when you were putting it together, and just that freedom.
Yeah, for the first time in my life, I wasn't working to someone else's musical orders, and I vehemently argued the toss when people were saying, "Oh, it should have this and should have this." I'm like, "No, that's not the vision. It's not." And it was just for me.
You can definitely see that you were enjoying performing it when you did the gig in the Cavern. Was it Germany?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, Balverhöhler, it's called. Yeah.
You could see you were absolutely having a blast doing that, and I thought it was a brilliant performance. Winterfylleth's performance, I found the sound wasn't very good
on the stream. Yeah,
on the stream you couldn't really make it out because it's so fast. But Arth's set was fantastic. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche, but I mean, it's about 23 years since I'd fronted a band with a guitar in my hands. So I was in a couple of bands like when I was sort of late teens and early 20s, kind of stuff like a lot of people do. And I literally had to buy a guitar to front Arth because I didn't own one because I haven't needed one since, kind of thing. So it's a cliche to say, but it's really true. That was like the stuff of dreams. That's like when I was a teenager, you want to be quote unquote a famous rock star, like rocking out with, jumping around a stage with a guitar. That was it. So I just, resolved myself that come hell or high water, I was going to give it some welly, and why not? Live the sort of dream, mid-40s, and if I never get to do it again, I never get to do it again. But yeah, I mean, I think I can safely say I love all of what I do to one extent or another. I love teaching piano because I've taught piano since I was 15, and getting people playing their first things on piano is a big kick because they're usually people who are older adults who've spent most of their life thinking that they'll never be able to do it for one reason or another, and I get them to do it pretty quickly, and they go, wow, and then they go and do something else. I'm not trying to create a legion of professional piano players. They're just doing it for the joy of it. So I do love doing that, and I do love coaching the choirs that I coach. And but if you want to make me pick one, that I could only do all day, every day, then it would be Arth.
Well, that's a good answer. I mean, it makes sense as well, because it's, if you've been, the evolution has brought you there, and it's the thing that's brought you most joy recently. So that makes sense. I'm just gonna, go on, Stephen. You ask next.
The story and the Arth album. I was just looking it up last night just to find out a bit more about it, and I discovered that St Cuthbert actually saw a UFO. Did you know that?
St Cuthbert saw a UFO.
Did you not know that?
I guess a UFO just means unidentified flying object. So I suppose it could be a bird that you couldn't recognise.
No. It was at night, and it was a light that he saw coming down from the sky, but then it went back up again.
It's true. So this is when he before he became.
How much mead has Stephen had?
No, it wasn't me. St Cuthbert had the mead.
This was before he became a monk, wasn't it? Wasn't this on the death of St Aidan?
Yes.
This was the death of Aidan, because
he thought the soul was getting taken back up to heaven.
Right.
But when I read it, I thought, this just sounds like a UFO report to me, because the light comes down and then it goes away back up. So it's obviously not a meteor. So I found that quite interesting.
There are all kinds of stories and legends around it. And, I never pretended to be any kind of historical expert on this at all.
Yeah.
I had to do reading about it like all of us do when we want to write about a subject.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not my specialist subject by any stretch of the imagination. But I just found the more I sort of dug about it, the more I found it really interesting things, like the notion that the coffin refused to move any further.
That's a very Anglo-Saxon thing to talk from the perspective of an object having agency. It's very, very typical.
I thought that was a great notion, that the coffin had decided this was where it had to rest.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's the thing like in Tolkien's in the Lord of the Rings. You got the thing like the ring decides to fall off the finger. Mm-hmm. It's a very old English Anglo-Saxon type of thought process behind that.
And the stories around the body remaining incorrupt, and that being a sign of His Holiness, and then of course the fast forward to the 1800s and the story that they had set about opening the coffin again and found only bones, and this was proving that the incorruptible body was a myth. But of course, perhaps that was because that's not where the real coffin lies, and only 3 monks know where the real coffin lies, and all these kind of legends and stories around it just sounded really interesting. And of course, I couldn't think of a better topic for a doom metal album.
No,
the monks trudging around,
monastic doom.
Metal. with a coffin, avoiding Vikings. I mean, that's about as metal as it comes.
Yeah, it definitely fits your voice.
Yeah, it really does. So you mentioned that you're doing a follow-up with Arth, but what you didn't say, and I don't know if you're prepared to say, is what's the subject matter behind that?
I can't tell you that.
You can't tell us?
No, I can't tell you that.
St Cuthbert gets taken away by a UFO.
It will be about Northumbria.
Okay, but I was privy to you having a very in-depth conversation to a certain historian who's published by the same publishers as me in Bamburgh Castle, and after I'd introduced you, you basically talked to him for a long time, and I didn't get a look in after that. And I think I have an idea that maybe I know what's going to be next, but.
Well, you got to take these opportunities to speak to people when you can, right?
Yeah, that's right. No, that's fine. But I was thinking as well.
I can't say.
No, it's fine. It's fine. But I have an idea, but we'll find out. And it's very doom metal. The idea that I've got, so I'm pretty sure.
That would mean you should write it then, Matthew.
Well, we could get it out. We could quickly gazump.
Beat me to it.
Yeah, we'll beat Mark to it. Suddenly bring it out next week. Well, I was thinking that you've obviously written about the end of Cuthbert and the death of Cuthbert, and then his bones being carried around. But in the 8th book in my series, I actually talk about the young Cuthbert before he becomes a monk, and kind of what leads him to becoming a monk in a totally fictionalized way, as obviously. So it's called For Lord and Land, that book, though, which I think is quite close to that to Arth and the sort of the title, which is obviously a complete coincidence, because I wrote it before I'd met you or heard of the band or anything. But I'll if you drop me a address afterwards, I'll send you a copy and you can see what you think. Read a bit about Cuthbert as I see him.
Shall we move to the regular slots then?
I think we should, because we're kind of running out of time. Yeah. So at the end of every episode, when we interview guests, we have a set of regular slots. We ask them regular questions. So first, I don't know if you prepared an answer, but if not, I'll catch you unawares. But what have you been reading? Which you've already answered, I guess. But what have you been reading and watching over the last week or two?
I am reading a book on the subject of the second Ard album, which I can therefore not name. But what have I been watching? Me and my wife really got into Suits like years later than everyone else. So I've been watching quite a lot of Suits. I like to have something that I can switch off, and of course, watching quite a lot of the World Cup at the minute as well.
Oh yes, because you're a big football fan, aren't you? I see you often talk about going to the football. Yes, and the World Cup, for those who are interested in football, is quite entertaining.
It is, yeah. Again tonight, one of the big boys has gone.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. So is that why you got to get off early so you can go and watch?
No. What they've gone? Belgium went just before I came on. So.
I thought you wanted to watch Spain because my wife's Spanish. So my second team that I could support is nice because they actually can play good football. Although this time England are playing reasonable football as well, so quite amazingly.
So yeah, I've been watching some of that.
That's good because I'm English as well, so I'm obviously supporting England, as you can tell from my accent. Hope we win.
No.
What have you been listening to recently then, Mark? Moving on.
I've been listening a lot to what have I listened to? There's a band called Midnight Odyssey that I'm a big fan of. Huge catalogue, like sprawling 20-minute songs. A lot of it's black metal, but then he's also made a few releases recently that are very much influenced by the sort of 70s Berlin synth kind of scene, which is quite interesting. So I'll be listening to a lot of Midnight Odyssey because I'm a big fan. Listening to one or two today. I had on. I can't remember. I think they were Swedish. So that sort of mid-90s black metal scene. One or two sort of the lesser known diamonds from that scene. So there was a band called Dawn, who had an album called Slaughter Sun. I think it's an amazing record. I had that on again today. Listened to a lot of the Ukrainian bands. I'm a big fan of Drukt.
I hoped you would name them because I don't know how to pronounce them. Say it again.
I believe it's Drukt, but right. That could be mistaken. But I think that's the case. Roman from Drukt has got a number of other related projects. So yeah, I listen to a lot of his music.
And they've got a new album out.
Yeah, true. And I also listen to a lot of the. There's a French record label called Ultime Records, which is like an ambient label. And there are a number of artists on that label which I like to listen to. I find that sort of really relaxing. So there's an artist called AES Dana or AES Dana, whatever the pronunciation of that is, that I listen to a lot. And there's a guy called Martin Non-Static that's on that label. So yeah, a lot of sort of electronic ambient stuff as well as extreme metal as well.
Okay, right. Thanks very much, Mark. Just quickly, we'll let you plug you actually teach people piano on like Facebook and stuff, don't you? So do you want to quickly tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So my community on Facebook is called Kick the Stress Piano for Wellbeing with Dr Mark Deeks. And then my website is thatpianoguy.club. So yeah, I teach people to play piano online. I've got clients in different parts of the world, and a lot of it is pre-recorded, so people can just digest at their own speed and pause, rewind, and so on with group support in the Facebook community. And then people can work with me one-to-one as well if they want to work on something specific, multiple camera angles over the piano and so on. So if you've ever stood at a party and said, "Yeah, I've always wanted to play piano, but," and whatever the rest of that sentence is, it's not true, and I'm the person that sorts it out.
Nice.
Well, yeah, and every Friday you do like a 15-minute slot or something, don't you? Just play a little bit
pop songs relaxing, and stuff,
relaxing music.
It's called TLC, Tunes Live with Coffee.
Yeah,
2:30 on a Friday afternoon. I do it live on my Facebook channels.
I've listened in a couple of times. Well. Yeah, that's good. That's nice.
Thanks.
That's great. So thanks ever so much, Mark, for coming on the podcast. It's been great having you on. It's been really interesting. We covered loads of different subjects, and maybe when you bring out your enigmatic, whatever the next Ard album is, we'll get you back on in a year or so.
Absolutely.
And we can talk about that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, guys.
Well, that's it for today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. Please let us know if you have any questions or things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. You can contact us on the Facebook page, facebook.com/rockpaperswordspodcast, or on Twitter @rock_swords.
You can find out more about our books on matthewharvey.com and stephenamackay.com. And we're also both on Twitter and Facebook, and we love to hear from readers and listeners, so drop by and say hi.
The theme music is written and performed and copyrighted by us. Until next time on Rock, Paper, Swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harvey.
And it's goodbye from me, Stephen A. Mackay.